You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, book lovers, to BOOKSTORM Podcast. As always, we're bringing you the very best-selling fiction, the latest, greatest books. We search for them, we vet them, and we have found one. We're here with the amazing Liza Palmer today to talk about her new book, Family Reservations. And Liza, welcome to BOOKSTORM.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Before we get started talking about the book, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Liza Palmer is an internationally best-selling author. Her book, which you've heard and love, Conversations with the Fat Girl, became an international bestseller its very first week in publication. Wow. It's been optioned for a series. We can't wait for that to come out. Her books have achieved a lot of accolades from places like Entertainment Weekly, Real Simple, Library Journal. She has won a William Morris Award for Southern Fiction. And here's some of the best part. She earned 2 Emmy nominations, writing for the very first season of VH1's pop-up video. How cool is that? Congratulations.
It was the return. It wasn't the original. Yeah, but
return?
It was when it returned. Yeah.
That is very cool. And we're thrilled to have you here with us today. I want to add one thing for our listeners, because this, I think, is important and maybe is why this book is so heartfelt. You wrote this book while battling cancer.
Yeah. I think it didn't know it at the time. I think the crucible that this book was written in was something. I even have I went to this fancy hotel up in Santa Barbara because I was just driving up to Santa Barbara. I live in LA and that 101 is gorgeous. And so I was like, okay, let me drive up for New Year's Eve. And I was like, if they have a really cheap room, then I'll get it. And so I went up there and I was like, and then I took a photo and you can see it on my Instagram right now. Little did I know. And it was like, New Year, new book. And it was January 2017. And I couldn't crack it. I couldn't crack 9. And I think, I had a writer friend kind of talk about, I'd like to blame it on the pandemic, but obviously it was 2017. But the pandemic, I think, made a lot of us not ask what we're doing, but why we're doing it. And it made us ask kind of these bigger questions. And I think that's why a lot of us are a little bit stalled out, is because we're kind of going back to basics and, asking big questions about our lives. And so I was already stalled out back in 2017. And then in 2020, I finally got it. I finally cracked it. And I wrote Succession in a Restaurant on my journal when it just it got there. So in 2020, that was October 2020. So I wrote the first act in January 2021 to April. I then switched representation because it was kind of this new chapter, new moment. That took 4 months, which it should. It's a long process. And I did. I got the perfect kind of creative partner. And then she came back with some great notes. This book was only going to be in one POV in the beginning, instead of omniscient and 4. And then we got cracking. We signed in September. I was like, let's get going. And then November, diagnosed with uterine cancer. So it was just like this. Oh, yeah. So everything stopped. And thank God, uterine cancer, it's in a place where it's made to hold things. And so it did a good job and it held it. City of Hope is incredible. And so that was basically all of 2021. And so I was writing at that point a little bit. I'd started on the notes and started over from Act 1. And then 2022 was, did it spread? And I was writing it the whole time during all that stuff. And it does, when you think you're not going to be able to do something, and it puts a fire under you that yeah, I haven't seen up until this point. It was beautiful.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that very personal story
Yeah.
because it's inspirational. So you come out
Yeah.
of COVID and you
Yeah.
say, now I know what's important. What we've
Got
all
it.
been there. You come
Yep.
out of having cancer and you say, I'm
Great.
realizing I'm seeing some things here and I'm going to write.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And maybe those
And the book
hardships gave you
yeah, the book
courage.
is
Like, does it give us
it did.
courage
And
to be like, I just got to live my life, say whatever I want to
it
say? Cause why not?
yeah. Yeah, and it does to a point. It's like, I think it's, I somebody said something once, which is that, crying is processing, which, I'm uncomfortable with because, we're a Navy family and it's like, just walk it off. Um, and I think I didn't, it's such a, cancer. And I'm sure for people who are listening who've had it, it is so exquisitely tender that you almost can't understand, you feel like you're fine, and then your hands are shaking when you're putting on your pajamas. Like it comes from nowhere and everywhere and all this kind of stuff, and it sneaks up on you in this incredibly singular way. And I think on top of that, I think it was, you know the reason, like, trying to find your purpose and what you want, I think, is kind of what everybody's kind of asking these big questions about. And because I was so stalled out since 2017, and it was me, like, I think because I had to ask these questions about why I'm writing, I had to go back to the very beginning. And I think for a lot of artists, when you want to be part of the cool kids club, art will get you there. And so then you start writing for other people. And you're like, well, do you love me with this? Do you love me with this? But what happens is your writing gets shallower and shallower and shallower and shallower because it's not coming from you. It's coming from, please love me, please like me, let me into these cool kid clubs. And so my pitches, it wasn't publishing was doing what it was, but I was giving them more and more derivative pitches and copies of copies of copies of copies. And I think it was this kind of perfect storm of that happening and then cancer happening, where it was, it just makes everything, I can't even find the word. It is so singular. It makes everything important. Maybe that's it. It makes everything important. And I think for a lot of us, there's autopilot, there's all this kind of stuff. And I think at the same time, I'd been at a day job since 2015. So, I had to get a day job because nothing was selling because I was giving them terrible stuff. And so it was this perfect storm of, I don't want to be at this day job anymore. I want to have a legacy. If this takes me out, then let me write this book. Let me get there. And I think all of that is in this book of just, you can feel that yearning in Athena mostly, with that yearning for identity and purpose and all this kind of stuff. So it is all in the book, but it took a lot of drafts to not make it so tender, because I think it still has to tell that story. And so I'm very thankful for the amount of time I had with it. And that finally, I think the difference with this one is that I wrote this for me. No one was waiting for it. No one was doing anything. It was me from 5:30 to 8:30 every morning before the day job. At the beginning, it's terrible, right? Nobody wants to write from 5:30, but then it became this golden morning of, I had this terrible day job. I was battling cancer, and those hours became like a religion. It became wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were wrestling with the big questions, and as you've
Mm-hmm.
described, and that is coming through loud and clear in this story. You have
Right.
these wonderful characters who are wrestling with big questions and,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with loyalty,
Right.
identity, legacy. And we're going to dive into all of that. So,
Yeah.
if you'll allow me, I'd love to give our listeners just a very general background on your story. And if you want to add anything, by all
Oh,
means.
lovely.
But we're here to talk about family reservations. And in your story, we meet Marin Winter. She is a world renowned restaurateur. She has built an empire on her skill, on her delicious food. She's got a reputation. And her retirement is fast approaching, and it has thrown her three daughters, who have all worked or for or with her in some capacity,
Mm-hmm.
into kind of a concern about where are things going? What is their role? How do
Yeah.
they now succeed what their mother is doing? And on the night of Marin's annual New Year's Eve party, one of the daughters crosses a line, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a humiliating family event that transpires very publicly, especially amongst the culinary elite. And
Mm-hmm.
what I love about it is it's a catalyzing event for these daughters now to
Yeah.
wrestle with all the big questions, especially when we have a strong mother like Marin Winter. Would you like to add anything to that background before we talk about some of those specifics?
No, I think I will add, it's just a real love letter. I think there's something incredibly singular about relationships between sisters and mothers and daughters, and I think it's just a love letter to mothers, daughters, and sisters, because there's some stuff in here that I think only we will get. I think there's a fight with the sisters at one point, and I think it's very true to life. So I think it's also a love letter. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I wanted to use the word collision course because it was
Yeah.
we have a lot of ability, strong
Yes.
personalities, not so
Yeah.
strong personalities,
Right.
confusion, direction,
Right.
and it all comes to this boiling point, the crucible, like you say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with that backdrop, Chris, why don't you kick us off?
And also, not only personalities, female hormones are involved in this.
Mhm.
I've got to say to our listeners, this book is about relationships,
Yeah.
wonderful things, and also the difficulties. But you took us, Liza, into the hearts and minds of mothers and daughters and sisters. Listen, families are never simple, but family businesses, I have a couple
Yeah.
friends in big family businesses. It is challenging. What really struck me in this book was what occurs when one family member, especially a parent, places their own ambitions and desires above their children. I saw in your story that it could easily become toxic.
Mm.
Can you expand upon your creation of Marin Winter, who, by the way, we all love to hate for a while?
Mhm. I
Felt a
know.
little, felt a little sympathy and empathy for when we got to
Yeah.
know her, but still love to hate her sometimes. What does a parent's life goal? When does a parent's life goal become toxic? And is there any escape for those children who've been sort of raised to minimize themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because I think it's like, for me, the tagline, almost like the second title of this thing, is just "Boundaries are hard," which I think it's like, and especially for women, I think, we are taught from a very young age to that, we need to be for the service, for support, and all this kind of stuff. And I think um, this book is really about having those boundaries. And I think the escape, what you're talking about, I remember a long time ago, back in the day, someone said that in your primary relationships, and obviously family, I think, is the big one, but I think these can be in, like, several different friendships, partnerships, all that kind of stuff, depending on the toxicity, right? We're all in the theater of this family, right? You're in the theater, but they said you don't have to be in the front row. um and that really helped me. It was like, okay, so I think what this book is about is the Winters are trying to figure out, A, if they want to stay in the theater, and B, where in the theater is actually safe for them. Because they've been in the front row this whole time and they've just been taking hits, especially the three daughters. But I think, this book also came out of, I was in the nerdiest book club of all time. We read Shakespeare in order. And it's fantastic, by the way, to see Shakespeare learn. It's actually really incredible. And when I read Lear at that point, it was, first of all, I had read it before in high school or whatever like that. But, Cordelia is such a huge character and she's in it for 8 pages. And I'm like, wait, where does she go for the line? Like, what's her life like and all that kind of stuff? And I think I was so heartbroken. I had read it then, and that was what I got during the book club, which is, God, Cordelia's not in it at all, and she's the youngest daughter in Lear. And then when I read it again, when I was kind of thinking about this book, I was so heartbroken that she was the only one that was freed in the beginning, right? Because she had told the truth and all that kind of stuff, which is another kind of point that is hit throughout the book. And then she's gone, and apparently she's living whatever life she's living. And then she comes back to this toxic family only to die, to be killed because of it. And I was just like, where, what, given the modern idea around therapy and boundaries and toxic families and stuff like that, could I right that wrong where I could save Cordelia in a way where it was, and that's really where a lot of this was born, was that idea. Because I think it's like, it's Brene Brown. I think I think it's in Rising Strong, where she talks about the people who have the most compassion are actually those people that have the best boundaries. And I think that helps me see that theater where, because you feel like a monster when you finally have boundaries, you feel selfish, you feel, like I'm not a good person, all this kind of stuff. And it's actually exactly opposite. It's like, you are now able to have compassion for those people, as toxic as they may be, because you now have a safe distance from them. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, you are. That's some wisdom
Okay.
right there. That is such a
Yeah.
good truth. And I can't help but wonder if people with more compassion um, are better at relationships because they were hurt so much. So they're learning boundaries sort of the hard way. And
Right.
now they know how to
Right.
tackle these difficult relationships.
Right.
I don't know, but you spelled it all out here. It really gave us, Kristen and I were talking before it for a good while.
Well, and I think, most movies and novels and stuff like that, mostly movies, they do a disservice to people who are trying to kind of crack their own lives or have boundaries, because usually that struggle is just like a fun movie montage of them like sleeping by themselves or like having a hard time and stuff like that. And it's so much harder than that. It is like it's these little baby deer steps that you feel like a monster every time. And I think I really wanted to make it, because I was having such a hard time with this, that I was like, I'm going to tell the truth about how hard it is for boundaries. Because I think, to your point about like, what do you do with this toxic family member who's all this kind of stuff? And it's like, unfortunately, there is a symbiotic relationship. It is this thing where, and you kind of see them struggling with this without their mother, without that huge kind of clay-footed icon, right? They have nothing to measure themselves by. And so it's this really codependent relationship, but it's also when you kind of live and die by this external thing, whether it's a parent or whatever it is, you kind of don't risk a lot, and there's a bit of safety in that. And so, and that's kind of talked to about in the book as well, which is you got to get skin in the game and you got to go out on your own. Because I remember even way back in the day when somebody was called it terrifying freedom, which I think is and that's what the book I think has a lot of it about, which is, you think that what you want is to kind of break free from these things. But what you realize, and there's this really wobbly bridge out of it, which is a lot of what the book is, where it feels terrible. It feels terrible because all your markers are gone. It's this terrifying freedom where you feel like you're going to float away. Because most times we put little sandbags on ourselves so that we can kind of be more grounded. And I think a lot of times these bad relationships or a bad job or all these kind of things give us something to ground ourselves in safety and certainty, which I think is what a lot happens to the book when things explode, is people just feel like this terrifying freedom of floating away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so many great thoughts. And I'm going to tell you, Liza, we're going to join your nerdy book club because Chris and I were talking about Shakespeare before you got on. And
Yeah, yeah.
the Willow song we were talking about. It's so weird that you brought that up. But anyway, I want to ask you, because your story, as we alluded to earlier, really dives into this idea of legacy. And while
Yeah,
legacies can be a good thing, they can also be a little bit stifling for
yeah.
those who come after, right? And is a legacy particularly constricting when you are dealing with a very well known parent? Do you think those expectations are higher by the parent? I mean, what do you think? Because you were really playing with this idea.
Yeah, and I think there's a line in it which is, what does it say about an empire if they're threatened by their own progress? And I think that's one of the lines that kind of starts everything out in that whole thing. And I think as I kind of alluded to before, I think there's a bit of this codependence, because if you live in somebody else's shadow, if you walk their path, then you have a certainty about you. Like, there is a safety to walking somebody else's path. So there is kind of a symbiosis where, you know, it may not feel good because you're always in the shadow, but there isn't that terrifying freedom as well. And I think that's a lot what I played in this book, is like, of course you want to break free. It's like, in the beginning, you see these three kids, and then you see this kind of parent who is, to the reader eye in the beginning, is not going to be a positive influence. And then all you want them to do is get away. And I think so often in our lives as well, we have people who are like, God, just leave that guy, or do this or do that. Just you just want them to just move, stop going back. And even like, I remember, like, even with kids, they always come home from school and they're like, always talk about the one person on the playground that you're like, stop playing with them. Like, stop playing with them. They hurt your feelings every time.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah.
there's a certainty and a safety in those same ruts that we have. And so I think while there is a danger of that legacy, and that legacy can be this kind of very dark, not a shadow, just a dark cloud sometimes, I think part of this book is really looking into, what is my role in that? Like, what am I getting out of living in somebody's shadow? And what am I scared of, essentially, in stepping away and onto my own path, which is, it's uncertain, it's unsafe, there's risk, there's failure, all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people stay on that path of their parents or their whatever it is, because it's the devil. And I
Yeah.
think it's all of those things. And I think a lot of the book is about trying to kind of recalibrate expectations about what it feels like to break free, because you think you're going to be celebrating it, and instead you're just like, oh my God, what have I done? Everything is uncomfortable at this point. And uncomfortable reads as bad. Even though uncomfortable can be good, the discomfort reads as bad. And I think that's a lot of what that wobbly bridge out has on
Yeah.
it.
Oh, and I think I love what you said, because it makes me think about having discernment to look at the legacy and pull out the things that are
That's it.
wonderful and creative and genius, and be inspired by them. I mean, after all, we
Right.
stand on the shoulders of a lot of people, especially even as
Yes.
women, right? But
Yes.
then having that discernment to say, how do I do this with my imprint, with my particular talent or
Right.
aptitudes,
Right.
and something that resonates with who I am? And
Right.
so I
That's
so I
exactly it.
love what you said. It's a
Yeah.
fantastic way of looking at that. And I almost wish
Right.
that we could train our young people to
Oh, yeah.
evaluate things that way, rather than throwing everything out. That whole generation is bad. Those are the boomers. Well, we stand on
Right.
their shoulders in many respects. And then there were things we have to do way better. And so
Well, I
having
think
that
what's so
discernment.
yeah, and I think what's so interesting, I think change is always hard. And so I think, once again, it's change reads as bad simply because it's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's
Yeah.
it's it's very good. It just reads as bad. And I think one of the first signs of change is something is going on, either a relationship or an event or something like that, and you say, not that. And that's the first step to change, because we don't know oftentimes what we want. It's the hardest question. When somebody says, what do you want? You're like, I don't know. And especially for women, we are trying to be like, well, what do you want? And so we honestly don't know sometimes what we want. And so for a lot of people who are trying to find that discernment, I think we want it fully baked out of the oven, instead of in these kind of batch testing, which is the first the first kind of step to discernment is not that. And then you go from there, and then you start carving out what you have. But I think what you want, but I think there is it needs to be a loving and gentle and patient, and it takes a long time. And I think that's another thing, that it's like, this book, it talks about the time of it. And it's like, I think what we want is that montage. We want, like, to be able to go to a new city, and then we own a bakery, and it's like, it's just kind of lonely. And I think that's a lot of what that is, that change and that discernment is a muscle that is built over, I think, a longer period of time than we expected.
Yeah. I love all your food analogies, by the way. Those were great. The half baked, the batches. That's awesome.
Yeah, because we are talking about restaurant business here with the Family Reservations, and we gotta love it. Okay, I'm going to take a little different turn because I really was infatuated with this character, Lola. Tell me if I got her name right. TDC?
TDC. Yep.
Yep. And she was a reporter for our listeners. She was there to get her next big story. She was researching the restaurant, and she had won a Pulitzer. So she was out supposedly to tell the truth. But yet, the reader watches her secretly listening, interviewing only certain people. And the reader started to understand that this truth was being procured very strategically. She had a certain story she wanted to tell, and she was creating it or maybe even manipulating it. It was interesting to me that even Marin Winter believed her version of her story. She believed the lies that she was telling herself. What is the danger, as you, as the writer of these characters, of searching for one truth or one story and attempting to reveal that to the world? Because every woman in this story had her own version of truth.
Right. Right. And I think, while I think everyone in the book has a different relationship with the truth, I think it's tantamount to understand they all do believe they're telling it. And I think, because that's the same thing with us. It's like, I think in life, we think we're telling the truth mostly to ourselves, right? And then we look back at that situation like, oh my God, I was lying to myself the whole time. Like, of course that friendship was toxic. Of course that relationship wasn't good. Like, and I was sitting here like, just absolutely lying to myself, thinking that I had everybody fooled, including myself. And I think, for me, Lola did two things. Actually, Lola is the character in the book with the most integrity. So she actually is the only one that, for me, I needed an avatar into this world. And that's what Lola was. Lola was kind of the Jim from The Office who could kind of look at the reader and be like, that's not the truth. That's what her character was. She was supposed to give the readers, because there's so many people telling their own truth, we needed somebody who was like, what do you think of that? Because I think as the book goes on, you believe Lola, because she does have the most integrity. And I needed somebody who didn't have a dog in this fight. And I think that was Lola. But I also needed what I think Lola also does, and it's a very boring structural thing, but there was a great line that Hitchcock had about putting a bomb under the table. And he would do it all the time. A bomb under the table is one of the best examples of this is in Inglourious Basterds, where the opening scene takes place. And then they're having this kind of very discussion on the top. And then the camera goes below and you see the people the family that they're talking about right under the boards. And then you come back up. And now to the discussion. And after that happens, you now have a bomb under the table, right? The stakes and tension are the reader, the watcher is now sick to their stomach at this point. It's completely changed the scene. And now that you have Lola in here, she is the bomb under the table, which is like, you're like, that all these people are lying. And you're just like, oh my God, when are they going to be like, this isn't going to. And so it's also built for that, which is I needed somebody to be that kind of look to the camera of, no, they're not, they're not telling the truth on this one. And I think you have the omniscient narrator, but I think you also needed this very core value integrity character who you could trust. Because I don't think anybody else was trustworthy in this one, which we're not. I'm not when it comes to my own stuff. I'm like, I can argue my way out of a paper bag. It's like, I shouldn't be trusted either.
Yeah, we did love her. We really like that character, Lola. And you're right.
Yeah.
Everyone was believing all their own stories, but because she wasn't a part of the story, maybe she was the only one who could see clearly.
Yeah. And I think what I loved about her too is she was the one who it's one thing to and we've all experienced this where you have a friend who's like, oh, they're always nice to me or whatever. And it's like, because they perceive you to be at the same level. And so, Lola interviewing Marin is two equals, right? So Marin's going to be very different with Lola then Marin's going to be with the grill chef or the poissonnier or, the valet or whoever. And so to get that full truth of somebody, Lola actually does talk to everybody and not just people at Marin's level. So she starts putting together this real portrait of her.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liza, I want to ask you, sometimes a big ego goes hand in hand with genius. And we see that
Yes.
with this character, Marin, that we've talked a lot about. She started humble, but she eventually became like some of the tantrum throwing chefs that she despised. Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you think that family members are best equipped to keep a giant ego in check, especially in this family business situation? What do you think?
No, and I think that's that complicated thing, right? Which is you can't tell anybody how to act or be. What you only have control over is your boundaries, which is where are you going to be in the theater, and I think it's that, for Marin, and I know that we've all experienced this as well, which is like, until we want to do it for ourselves, it's just not sustainable. It's not absorbing. It's not real. It's like, we will do things for other people, and it will not have a shelf life to it. Like, if real change has to bubble up from within. And so I think if a family member stepped in to talk about an ego, we've all been there where somebody is on their best behavior for however long. And then when they think that, they've done it long enough, they go back to where they were because they were doing it for you and not for them. And so I think that's another big piece of this is like, Marin having to come to terms with some hard truths about her ego and who she's become. And I think we see so much of this in the world, but I think looking at somebody so corrupted by fear that, we've even have people in our lives where it's like, I knew you and now you're rotted from fear and whatever it is. And I think that's kind of Marin's journey as well, which is trying to find, because it's just fear that she's got, it's that fear of, growing old and being useful and she's no longer the trendsetter and all this kind of stuff. And so she's having to really kind of face down some big stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why in a family business, everybody should work elsewhere for a little while
Right.
because that'll keep
Yeah.
your ego in check, right? When you are out in a professional world outside of this milieu where are unchecked.
Well, I think if you look at, because I think when I built families in the book, you can look at how Penny, who is the master gardener, who is, Marin's oldest friend, they worked together back in the 70s. They opened Northern Trade, which is this 2 Michelin star restaurant. And she is the one who basically makes everything possible in the restaurant. And I wanted to use Penny and her husband and Hannah, who is their child. And you can see exactly that Penny and did that. They were like, go see the world, like go and get a gap year, go to college, do what you're gonna do. And then finally, when Hannah came back and was like, I want to be a gardener, they knew that it was their decision and not just follow behind, or you're now so locked into this world that you don't have any other options. It's like, so I think looking to the other family units in here about how to do this, and you even saw it when they went to Banquet, which is the big conference that they go to in Oxfordshire in the middle of the book. You even saw that with Dame Jocasta and her 2 nieces, about how that legacy plays with these other people who are managing it in a different way.
Excellent.
A more healthy way. Yeah.
Well, I've just got to say, readers, that discussion, I'm sure, is going to make you want to go pick this book up because you're going to discover something about yourself inside this book. Do you have a sister and a mom, or are you even a part of a family? Do you know somebody who's been in a family business? It's really going to make you think long and hard. And I don't know, I'm coming out of here setting some more boundaries now. That's all I can think of.
Just baby steps. I think that's all we can, I think somebody told me the best one, which was so great, which was you start with just not answering the text right away. Just wait 24 hours. And if you can't wait 20, just wait an hour. And it's like, that's how we slow and steady, small, tiny steps, and just start with not that, and don't answer their text right away. And that's where you start.
Okay, I'll take that. Now, before we let you
Yeah.
go, Liza, okay, if you're watching on YouTube, I told Liza, I love when someone takes a genuine, authentic home background. So we've got
Yeah.
your background part of your fridge. We got some really cool magnets. And then
Yeah.
on the other side, we have a whole working erase board. And
Yeah.
you told me, gave us a little clue. That's your next book. Can you
Yeah.
can you tell us what it might be about or give us a little clue?
I think this is book 10. And what's so interesting is uh I always am so curious about how a book is going to talk to me. And I think, 9, which is Family Reservations, talk to me through notebooks and all this kind of stuff. 10 wants stickies. 10 wants stickies. It wants to be on the board. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's up there. And 9 had like, and it didn't work, but it looked really impressive. Like um I had all the 3x5 cards, and it was all broken down to like all this kind of stuff. Didn't use it, took it down because it was like during the troubles. And so this one is so interesting because it's so different. But this one is really about once again, it's like 9 is a love letter to mothers, daughters, and sisters, and 10 is really a love letter to the singularity of female friendships. I think there's something. It's a beautiful arc of these two women, and you know hilariously, I think it's like, and for writers out there, I think it will, books know what they're about before you do, know what they're really about. You may think you understand the plot, but the theme and the reason you're writing reveals itself when it's too late to turn around. So this one is about grief. There's a bit of grief in here, but the main engine is these two wonderful women who are talking to me very messy, apparently, very chaotically.
We love that. We're all
Yeah.
about women empowerment here on Bookstorm, and
Mm-hmm.
very big believers in the power of female friendships.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be really cool. We cannot wait to have that book come back on Bookstorm podcast. I've got to say, thank you, book on the dry board, for however you want to create yourself over there. We can't wait to
Yeah.
read you. It's been just an absolute pleasure. Let me tell our listeners, you have to connect with Liza Palmer. You can find her on her website, lizapalmer.com. She's on X, Facebook, Instagram. It's been a lot of fun talking to you here. No?
Yeah. I'm actually not on accident. No, no, I'm
Did you
only
get
on
rid of it?
Instagram. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. It's gone. You
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
blog, but I think the blog is gone now, right?
I have a newsletter. Yeah, I have a newsletter. You can find it on the website. Yeah.
Okay, go
Yeah.
to the
No, but
newsletter, go to the
yeah.
website, and above all else, pick up Family Reservations. You're not going to want to put this one down. It's a real keeper. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so lovely. Your questions are incredible. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Take care now.
Thanks. You too. Bye 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 bye.
I love books that are set against a backdrop where we have business and artistry. And I think that was such a cool discussion because it just brought out how all of these relationships are played out against a crucible of, this is hard work. This is big time business. This is big time reputations, Michelin stars on the line. And so that urgency and that pressing, that was really cool to see how she put the characters up against that as well as each other. What do you think, Chris?
I thought the same thing. And, I love how she said you have to break away a little bit from your legacy question, because I know people who have been born into a very successful family business. So part of you says, hey, this is great. I don't have to go out and invent something. I'm walking in here. But then the other part of you says, I got to make this mine. I'm not happy just having this be grandpa's. How can I change this up, modernize it, individualize it, and where do I take it? And that's exactly what I saw in this book. People who were a little frustrated with having to do everything mom's way, mom's successful business. And mom didn't really want to give up the total control of allowing them to change that business. So it is a give and take. It's two sides to the story. And I just thought that was interesting for all of us. I mean, whether you say legacy is a business or whether you say it's some other tradition or characteristic or belief system, you can keep some of it and you can get rid of some of it.
Yeah. And having that discernment to know the difference, I think is a big part of maturity, because there are tried and true methods for running a business. There are things that people have vetted out over time. But then there are things that are, new. We have apps that run things and new technologies and new cultural ideas about things that you can tap into with artistry. And so I love that. I love being able to choose the things that work well and improve the things that don't without people feeling threatened about it. And I always tell my kids, I'm like, I hope you do way better than me and everything. Do better, do your thing. And I never want them to feel that as a parent, I'm competing with them or that I am in any way holding them back. And my son right now is choosing a logo for his sprouts business. He grows microgreens, and the whole family's weighing in on what the logo should look like. And I've been trying to bite my tongue, but they've got to do it in a way that reflects their interest, their excitement, their aptitudes. And in this book, we saw the characters wrestling with those things too. They saw a better way to do something, but they had this very strong personality holding them in place a little bit out of her fear. So
Yes.
I really had to check myself reading this book. I was like, am I doing this in any respect?
It is a very fine line between wanting the best for your kids and advising them too much. And it's also a very fine line because guess what? We aren't just parents. We're still people living, working, achieving. And as people in a family environment, we can become very caught up in me, myself, and I. We saw it to the extreme with Marin Winter, but I also felt to check, like, when you get together, am I asking enough questions? Am I imposing my own belief system? Am I pushing them to greatness where they don't want greatness? They don't have to be better. They just have to be whoever they want to be.
Yeah.
I don't care whatever you want to be, but just if that's what you want, do it. Separate from the family. This is where it gets tricky. I feel like Liza Palmer really brought out the intricacies, the beauty, but also the difficulties of family relationships. And man, this book touches upon all of it. So I'm just going to say, listeners, you got to pick it up. And in the meantime, stay on the radar. We got great stuff coming up this spring. And I'm just going to tell you the names of the authors because we have so many. We have Mary Kubica, Michelle Gable, Dervla McTiernan, Susan Mallory, Lisa Unger, Heather Gudenkoff, Christopher Reich, CJ Box, CJ Ray, Wabashig Rice, Amiko Jean, Benjamin Stevenson, and JD Parker.
Yeah, we have an exciting lineup. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We've got you in 77 countries, all 50 states, 1,600 plus cities. We're thankful for you. We love the fact that we hear from you about authors you want to see, and we are bringing them to you, the very best-selling authors. So stay on the radar with us, listeners. Find us at bookstorm.com. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com, at Facebook, Instagram, on X, and of course on YouTube. We've got 125, 130 plus authors, fantastic discussions with all of them, just like this one. So until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.